The convenience store's fluorescent lights buzzed overhead, casting a sterile, unnatural glow on the shelves lined with snacks and drinks. It was well past midnight, and the store was empty except for me, a weary college student named Peter, and the hum of the refrigerators. The night shift was never my favorite, but it paid the bills. I leaned against the counter, trying to stay awake by sipping on a lukewarm cup of coffee. The silence was occasionally broken by the low hum of the occasional car passing by on the empty street outside. I longed for the hours to pass quickly so I could escape the monotonous routine of the graveyard shift. Around 2 a.m., as I was restocking the candy aisle, the bell above the door chimed softly, signaling the arrival of a customer. I turned, expecting to see the usual late-night stragglers looking for a snack or a pack of cigarettes. However, what I saw made my heart skip a beat. A tall figure stood in the doorway, shrouded in a long, dark coat that seemed to swallow the dim store lighting. A fedora obscured most of the person's face, and the brim cast a shadow over their features. I couldn't see much, but their presence felt oddly out of place in the quiet store. "Can I help you?" I asked tentatively, trying to keep my voice steady. The figure didn't respond, and for a moment I thought they might not have heard me. Then, with a slow, deliberate step, they entered the store, the bell above the door chiming once again. The door closed behind them with a soft click. I watched as the mysterious customer moved through the aisles, gliding silently as if they were floating on air. They didn't seem to be browsing, just moving with an eerie purpose. The hairs on the back of my neck stood on end, and my heart began to race. I couldn't help but notice that the person's footsteps made no sound on the linoleum floor. It was as if they were moving without making any contact with the ground. Panic started to gnaw at the edges of my mind, but I tried to push it away. Maybe they were just an eccentric night owl, looking for a late-night purchase. I decided to keep a close eye on the stranger while pretending to stock the shelves, my fingers trembling as I rearranged bags of chips. Every so often, I'd glance over to see what they were doing. They moved with an eerie calmness, occasionally reaching for items and placing them in their coat's pockets. Time seemed to slow as I watched the stranger's bizarre behavior. It was almost as if they were in a trance, completely unaware of my presence. I didn't know what to do. Should I confront them, call the police, or wait for them to leave? As I debated my next move, the stranger turned down the aisle that led to the restrooms at the back of the store. My heart pounded in my chest as they disappeared from view. I knew I had to do something. I couldn't let them linger in the store any longer. I took a deep breath and approached the restroom door cautiously. It was slightly ajar, and a dim light spilled out from within. I knocked gently, my voice quivering. "Excuse me, the store is closing soon. You'll have to finish your business and make your purchases." There was no response, only an eerie silence that hung in the air. I pushed the door open slowly, peering into the dimly lit restroom. What I saw made my blood run cold. The stranger stood at the far end of the restroom, their back to me. They were facing the cracked mirror, and their long, bony fingers were tracing something on the surface. It looked like they were drawing intricate symbols in what appeared to be red chalk. My heart raced as I took a step closer, my voice trembling. "Hey, I said the store is closing. You need to leave now." The stranger turned slowly to face me, and I gasped in horror. Their face was concealed by a grotesque mask, a pale, featureless visage with hollow eye sockets. The mask seemed to be made of porcelain, and it was impossible to tell if there was a real person beneath it. In a voice that seemed to echo from the depths of a nightmare, the stranger spoke.
"I must finish what I started."
Panic surged through me, and I stumbled backward, fleeing from the restroom. I fumbled for my phone, my trembling fingers dialing 911. I tried to explain the situation to the operator, but my words came out incoherent, a jumble of fear and confusion. I retreated behind the counter, my eyes fixed on the restroom door. I could hear the stranger moving inside, their footsteps growing louder and more frantic. It was as if they were searching for something they believed they needed to complete their sinister task. Minutes felt like hours as I waited for the police to arrive. My heart pounded in my chest, and the store's eerie silence was broken only by the strangers' muffled movements. I had no idea what they were doing in there, but I knew it couldn't be anything good. Finally, the distant wail of sirens pierced the night, and I breathed a sigh of relief. Help was on the way. I stayed on the line with the operator, providing updates on the situation as I hid behind the counter, my eyes fixed on the restroom door. The police arrived quickly, and with guns drawn, they entered the store. I watched as they confronted the stranger in the restroom, shouting commands for them to drop whatever they were holding. The standoff seemed to stretch on forever, tension filling the air like a suffocating fog. Then, with a sudden burst of movement, the stranger rushed out of the restroom, a knife gleaming in their hand. The police reacted swiftly, firing a single shot that struck the intruder in the chest. The stranger fell to the floor, their grotesque mask cracking as it hit the linoleum. I couldn't see their face, but I knew that the encounter had ended in violence. The police rushed to secure the scene, and I was asked to provide a statement about what had transpired. My hands still trembled as I recounted the night's events, the fear and confusion still fresh in my mind. As the paramedics arrived to tend to the stranger's injuries, I couldn't help but wonder about their true identity and their sinister intentions. What had brought them to the store that night? What had they been drawing on the restroom mirror? And why had they refused to leave? The stranger was taken away in an ambulance, their fate uncertain. The police assured me that I was safe and that they would investigate the incident thoroughly. But as I watched the flashing lights of the ambulance fade into the distance, I couldn't shake the feeling that I had encountered something truly terrifying that night, a presence beyond explanation and comprehension, lurking in the quiet corners of the night shift at the convenience store. The clock in the security office read 11:45 p.m. as I settled into my chair for another night shift at Crestwood Mall. This sprawling shopping complex had seen better days. During the day, it buzzed with life, but at night, it transformed into a silent, cavernous space filled with shadows and echoes. I'd been working as a security guard for several years, and I had patrolled countless empty malls during the graveyard shift. Most nights were uneventful, but this night, I could feel a sense of unease creeping over me like a chill. The mall was dark, illuminated only by the occasional flickering overhead light. I stared at the bank of security monitors, each displaying a different section of the mall. Rows of closed stores and vacant kiosks stretched out before me, an eerie sight in the dim light. My radio crackled to life, and my supervisor's voice came through, reminding me to make my rounds. I sighed and grabbed my flashlight, knowing it was just another routine patrol. As I stepped out into the deserted mall, I couldn't help but feel like I was being watched. The first part of my rounds took me past the anchor stores, their massive entrances sealed with heavy steel gates. I checked each one, shining my flashlight through the bars to ensure everything was secure. It was a monotonous routine, but it had to be done. As I continued my rounds, I ventured deeper into the mall, my footsteps echoing through the empty corridors. The dim, flickering lights above cast long, shifting shadows that danced on the tiled floor. It was during one of these patrols that I first felt a shiver crawl up my spine. I couldn't quite put my finger on it, but something felt off. The silence seemed to press down on me, and I strained my ears to catch any unusual sounds. As I approached a junction in the hallway, I heard it, a faint, distant whisper. My heart skipped a beat, and I froze, my flashlight beam trembling in my hand. I strained to listen, but the whisper was too faint, too indistinct to make out any words. I shook my head, telling myself it was just my imagination playing tricks on me. I continued my rounds, but the sense of unease lingered. Hours passed, and I made my way through the mall. Each hallway seemed to stretch on endlessly, and I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched, that something was lurking in the shadows just out of sight. Around 1 a.m., I reached the far end of the mall, a section that was rarely visited even during the day. The stores here had long been closed, their dusty windows filled with forgotten merchandise. I shone my flashlight into one of the windows, the beam illuminating a mannequin dressed in outdated fashion. As I moved on, my flashlight flickered, and I cursed under my breath. I had been meaning to replace the batteries, but now was not the time. I smacked the flashlight against my palm, hoping it would hold out a little longer. That's when I heard it again, the whisper, this time clearer, as if it were right beside me. I spun around, my flashlight illuminating the empty tables and chairs. I called out, "Who's there? Show yourself." Silence answered me. I tightened my grip on the flashlight and continued my search, but the whispers persisted, growing louder and more insistent, as if they were closing in on me. I made my way to the center of the food court, my heart pounding, and stopped dead in my tracks. Before me, standing in the pale glow of the neon lights, was a figure. A tall, shadowy figure dressed in tattered clothing. My breath caught in my throat as I raised my flashlight, its beam trembling violently. The figure stood perfectly still, its features hidden in the darkness. "Who are you?" I stammered, my voice quivering. The figure didn't respond, didn't move. It just stood there, a silent sentinel in the eerie half-light. Panic surged through me, and I radioed my supervisor, my voice shaky as I described the intruder. But once again there was no response, just static and the relentless whispers that seemed to fill the air. I took a step back, my flashlight flickering in my trembling hand. The figure began to move, its footsteps echoing through the food court. It was coming closer, step by step. I turned and ran, my footsteps echoing through the mall as I sprinted toward the exit. The whispers followed me, growing louder and more frenzied with each passing moment. I burst through the mall's entrance doors, the cool night air hitting me like a shock. I gasped for breath, my heart pounding in my chest. The mall's exterior loomed before me, a dark, imposing structure against the night sky. I knew I had to get as far away as possible to find help and escape the haunting presence that had pursued me. I ran to my car, fumbling for the keys, and jumped inside, slamming the door shut. As I sped away from Crestwood Mall, I couldn't shake the feeling that I had encountered something beyond explanation, something that would haunt my dreams for years to come. I never returned to that mall after that night. The experience had left me scared, haunted by the memory of the shadowy figure and the relentless whispers that had filled the air. Some mysteries are better left unsolved, and some encounters are best forgotten in the depths of the night. I had worked as a janitor for years, cleaning up the messes that others left behind. But there was one place I'd always been assigned to avoid, the local hospital. Not that I had a problem with hospitals, it's just that there were rumors, stories of strange occurrences after dark. I never thought I'd find myself working there, but fate had other plans. It was a cold and cloudy evening when I received the call. They needed someone to fill in for a sick colleague at Mercy Hospital. Grumbling, I agreed to take the shift, thinking it couldn't be as bad as they said. Little did I know, it would be a night I'd never forget. I arrived at the hospital just as the sun was setting. The building was an imposing structure, its dark windows staring out like vacant eyes. As I entered the lobby, the staff greeted me, handing over a set of keys and explaining my tasks for the night. The night shift was usually quiet, and all I had to do was clean the empty halls and ensure everything was in order. Everything started off as usual. The fluorescent lights hummed overhead, and the quiet of the hospital settled over me like a shroud. I went about my tasks, mopping the hallways and empty rooms, the echo of my footsteps reverberating through the empty corridors. The night went on without incident until around midnight. I was on the third floor, going about my business, when I heard it. A series of soft but distinct footsteps. I froze, mop in hand. my heart quickening its pace. I strained to hear more, but the footsteps had faded away, as if they'd never been there. I tried to chalk it up to my imagination, the creaks and groans of an old building, but the unease lingered. The stillness of the hospital was somehow more oppressive, and the dark hallways cast by the flickering lights make it even more unsettling. As I continued my rounds, the footsteps returned, always just out of reach. I couldn't pinpoint their source or direction, and I couldn't find any logical explanation for them. I was getting increasingly spooked, my every nerve on edge. Then, as I was making my way down a particularly dark hallway, I heard something that sent chills down my spine. A series of soft but insistent knocks, as if someone were rapping their knuckles on the walls. I rushed to the source of the sound, but when I arrived, the knocking had ceased. There was no one there, just an empty hallway and the soft hum of the lights overhead. I was on edge, convinced that something wasn't right in this hospital, but I kept trying to tell myself that it was just my mind playing tricks on me. That's when I heard it. A voice, distant and faint, but unmistakable.
Michael?
The voice whispered, calling my name. I froze, my heart pounding in my chest. The voice was achingly familiar. It was my grandmother's. She had passed away years ago, and yet her voice echoed through the empty hospital corridor, calling out to me. I tried to dismiss it, to convince myself it was a figment of my imagination, but the voice persisted, growing louder and more insistent.
Michael?
It was as if she were standing right beside me, her presence haunting the empty hallway. Panic gripped me. I turned and ran, my footsteps echoing through the hospital as I sprinted through the darkened corridors. The voice continued to call my name, following me as if it were right behind me. I reached the exit, flinging the doors open and stumbling out into the cool night air. The voice ceased, and the hospital's doors slammed shut behind me as if sealing off the horrors that lurked within. I never returned to Mercy Hospital. I quit my job, and I've tried my best to forget that night. But the memory of the voice, the footsteps, and the knocking in the empty halls still haunts me. I can't explain what I experienced that night, and I don't want to. I've vowed never to set foot in that hospital ever again.